I am here with Jaime Schmidt, the entrepreneur and investor. How's it going, Jamie?
It's great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to get into this. And we were talking before we were recording about how we were kind of in a similar space at one point in my career as well. And I was just so excited to jump on before to learn about this story. And a lot of people listening to this are going to know the brand that you built and they may be using it currently. And I just am really eager to unpack it. But before we get into building up the business and everything, let's talk about your background. How did you get
Mhm.
started in business and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that not every entrepreneur sets out to become, a business owner. I think it's something that we sort of fall into just given our nature and who we surround ourselves with. But for me, it was more just sort of I was going through an identity crisis, sort of trying to figure myself out. I had graduated college. It was time to like step into the real world, and I didn't really know what that looked like or meant for me. But I did get a degree in business because it was sort of a default and something that my parents had encouraged, but not really knowing that that meant I'd be building a multi-million dollar business and, eventually selling it. But, I was at a turning point where I had been working my way up the corporate ladder in another job in Chicago. Realized that, I was on a great path with good benefits and compensation, but I didn't see myself, on that path for long term. It just felt like lackluster. And so I thought, all right, there's something I have to be good at. There's something I'm passionate about. There's something that can make, decent money and I can work for myself. And I knew I'd find it, but I just knew that I had to be patient and kind of get my hands dirty and try different things. So I literally, jumped in and started making different things. I was in Portland, Oregon. It's the most creative city, in the country. So I was making kombuchas. I was, making hot sauces and candles and soaps and things. And thinking there's got to be something here that could potentially turn a profit. And I ended up getting pregnant, and so my priorities sort of shifted a bit. I started focusing more on my health and my incoming baby. But with that, I started to also make my own products. For my skincare, I was making deodorants and lotions and sunscreens, just really after something that was healthy and natural. But it didn't yet click, that there was a business potential in what I was doing. But once I started making these things, I was really enjoyed them. They were working well, and started selling at the farmers markets more as something to do on the weekends. And you know, it was fun. I liked being in that scene. I liked other makers and creators and buying things. And so I started selling, and the response I was getting to my products was really positive, especially the deodorant. I had a number of people tell me they had been on a search for a natural deodorant that worked well, and this was the first one that had worked for them. So unexpectedly, I was changing people's lives, with my deodorant, and I was getting some really passionate stories, and realized, I had created something pretty significant. And not being a chemist, or having any sort of background in science, it was interesting that I was able to unlock, this formula just from kind of tinkering in my kitchen. So it started with some smaller stores around Portland. I started to get a little bit of interest in wholesale, and right then I realized, all right, this is it. This is what I've been looking for, and here's my moment.
Nice, very nice. And it sounds like you really like grassroots grew it from these sort of farmers markets or flea markets all the way into retail. Um, was there a big kind of presence around that time on e-commerce? Like you were doing a lot online. What was that kind of
Mhm.
split? What did that look like when you were kind of
Yeah.
moving onto a website?
It started, really with the local retailers. I hadn't built out a website yet. I had a very basic website that basically said, find me at these markets or go to these, local stores, but didn't have the capabilities or even interest in the very beginning to build an online store. So I kept it very small. It was bootstrapped. I was the only employee for, the first couple of years. So I was doing, what I could do within my capabilities, and also being a new mom, what I was able to pull off. But once I was in the stores and really saw that people wanted and needed this product, I wanted to make it available to as many people as I could, and so ended up creating a little storefront. D2C, had really just started to get popular. A lot of brands were starting to come onto the scene. My husband joined on and had more skills and kind of interest in that area, so he was able to help build the store out. And so our e-com sales were actually grew pretty quickly. We started seeding influencers, sending free product around to YouTubers and others, and getting a lot of interest that way across the world. So we were able to, spread the word about the product, before getting the wholesale distribution across the country and across the world. But then the two sort of grew in parallel. Ecom really grew quickly. I had a TV feature that brought a ton of business that I wasn't expecting, and also started getting a lot of retailers from that too. So I was starting to sell in some of the natural grocery chains, which was a logical step for me with a natural product. And then from there, getting interest from more kind of mainstream grocers. And then from there, the big box. And so it was sort of this like laddered approach, which worked really well for me.
Nice. And
Yeah.
what did it look like growing the team wise? I mean, what stage did you start really ramping up the hiring? Was it when you did
Mm.
the website? What were those sort of inflection points?
Yeah. The first hire was mostly when I was kind of losing my mind and realizing, the kitchen could only get me so far. So I hired a person and put him out in the mother-in-law house, behind the house. There's a little extra room where there was a sink and a table, and he basically made deodorant out there. And then quickly needed somebody for shipping too, and he was working in our garage. And so I had the two out there working, basically from my home. And then from there, I saw it, that we were set to grow pretty quickly, and so got a little warehouse down the street, which was not the most beautiful space, but it worked. And then it's crazy how we ended up building out in-house manufacturing, because I never, sat down and said, all right, am I ready to build a factory? Right. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but it just sort of happened organically because I had been making the product, in my home. And contract manufacturers just weren't really in my thinking. I wasn't, interested in giving my recipe away. I knew I couldn't meet order minimums in the beginning, right? Because usually they require you order so much product. And so I just sort of kept building slowly, one step at a time. So maybe it was, buying a bigger melting pot and then growing from there. And then the team just started to grow organically. Wherever I felt stress or pressure is where I would start to hire. And realizing that, I wasn't the best person to be doing all the things, and there are, more skilled people out there. And, but it's hard to hire for a startup, right? It's a very different environment. You want someone who, is professional and experienced, but also willing to take risks with a startup, which is an entirely different way of thinking. And so it's tough, but I made some really smart hires, and was lucky.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
And what did it look like KPIs wise? Like what was defining success early on? Did it
Yeah.
stay the same as you guys kind of scaled up? And what were those?
Yeah. It's funny because I look back on sort of the forecasting that we would do and the sort of the roadmap, and it hardly existed, to be honest. We were barely looking, more than like a month out into the future, because I just didn't, for one, I didn't know, what I wanted on a personal level. I didn't really fully understand the capabilities of the business. Of course, like 4 or 5 years in, things started to mature and we were a little more organized in that sense. But for me, I guess KPIs were more, happy customers, right? Were people returning and buying again? Were they spreading the word? Were my retailers happy? I wanted, I started to get pretty competitive because that space started to grow, right? The natural deodorant space. And so I wanted to be, the number one natural deodorant, in each store. And so, those, as informal as they may have been, we're pretty serious KPIs, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with such a, kind of meteoric rise, the back office, a lot of people listening to this are probably, maybe they're not as familiar with building out like a whole shipping process. But could you walk
Mhm.
through some of the like troubles of scaling up as quickly
Yeah.
as you guys did, where, there's just so many moving parts in logistics and getting that product, that stick of deodorant to someone that's ordering
Mhm.
online. Could you walk through some of the troubles or some tips that you could share about that scaling?
Yeah, it got especially tricky with different retailers having different expectations around, case sizes and how they wanted to receive in the warehouse. Um, so we had to have some flexibility there, and open-mindedness. But once you start getting more retailers, you have to kind of set your own standards, right? Like, this is what we offer. Because I used to try to keep everyone happy, and I was literally running around town too, delivering things by hand in the earliest days. And so then it became, okay, I will ship this to you at this cost. These are the case sizes that we're using, and this will be the cost, for shipping. And so just having those standards and not flexing, too much, or you'll drive yourself and your employees crazy. But there were also things like temperature. Our product was natural, so it was sensitive to extreme temps, and there was only so much we could do. like if a stick of deodorant was sitting in someone's mailbox all day, in the summer it might melt. So we would try little things like thermo mailers, right, that were supposed to be a little more temperature controlled, but that added to the costs. And so it was tough. Sometimes you just took a risk and hoped that, you didn't get a lot of phone calls that their stick had melted. And if it did, we'd replace it and just cross our fingers that it wouldn't melt again. So there were some things, you try your best to make it work. I remember my first international order was across, when it shipped on a boat. And so I knew it would be in transit for, a week or so. And I remember exploring all my options for like dry ice and whatever else I could do to just keep this thing intact, and did the best I could, with trying to be as, frugal as I could. And just waiting, and they got the order and everything was okay. But it's wild. When you start working with distributors, those things become a little easier to manage in terms of, your wholesale accounts, but still, it's tough. And then if you want to make a change, to your shipping cartons, for example, or your quantities or cases, that has a trickle down effect that it impacts every retailer too. And there's a lot of, sort of cleanup that has to happen for any little change that you make with your product. So,
hmm
yeah.
hmm So let's transition to the exit. Let's talk a little
Mm-hmm.
bit about how those conversations began, and how big was the team at that point?
Mm-hmm.
What was the scale? And yeah, let's talk through how that began.
Yeah. I had never had a plan for fundraising. We, had been able to bootstrap and recycle the money back into the business. And, I had no plans of changing that. We were able to take out a couple lines of credit, several years in, just because things started to get a little crazy with wholesale. But that felt sufficient. I never felt, the push or the pull to raise money. But when we started selling in, Costco, Target, Walmart, and launching all within a few months of each other, money became really, really tight. It was all tied up on store shelves and inventory. So, we were faced with the choice of try to raise capital fast, or, find some other way to make it work. And so it was around that time that we actually started getting some external interest from potential acquirers. And over the years, I'd gotten a few, no name kind of businesses reaching out to acquire me. I just threw the letters in the trash. But then when we started hearing from Goldman Sachs, who was hearing interest from Procter and Gamble and Unilever and L'Oreal and those, companies of that level, we thought, oh, there is something here, and let's pursue it. And so started to entertain those conversations, and next thing you know, we have a couple letters of interest, and started to really take it seriously.
Nice. And
Yeah.
because when you're on that side of getting LOIs and people all just
Mm-hmm.
really kind of coming to you, you have a lot of leverage, and with multiple offers, you're in a unique position to shop it around.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
what was that like? Was there multiple bids, and then did you kind of pit them against each other? What was that negotiation process like for you?
Yeah, it's tough because you want it to work so bad. So it's like, how much do you push, to really fight for it? But it's also like, hey, I am in a position where I can negotiate and I have some leverage here. And so, we the diligence process is pretty insane. There's the data room you have to pull together and provide so much information. There's so much work that goes into it, and everybody needs something different. So we did the best we could to provide what they neted, and but also be really clear in what our expectations were. And so the timing was interesting because, as you and I talked about before we started recording, one of our biggest competitors, Native Deodorant, was acquired like a 1 month before we were. So they were clearly in talks around the same time, and so that was interesting to discover that these big acquirers were talking to us both, right? And so that freaked me out. I thought, wow, we really came close here to either missing out altogether, or maybe this is a good thing because their evaluation could help ours, or whatever it
Mhm.
might be. But so I think it was the time for natural deodorants were very hot. I think a lot of these portfolio companies understood that they either needed to create their own, or try to or continue to compete against brands like Schmidt's and Native. And so it was the perfect time, and I think timing is a big piece of any acquisition for sure.
Definitely, definitely. That was
Yeah,
actually going to be my
yeah,
next question, was around how did you know that it was the right time, and what kind of tips could you share
yeah.
around timing?
That's hard, as a founder. I don't know that it ever feels 100% right, and you'll always, question is what if I waited another year? What if I, continued to power through. But I did know, that the competition was growing and becoming a lot more fierce in the category, and that there were limits to, what I could do with my team and without raising capital. So I had a, big job ahead of me to really build up like a C-level, suite that was just amazing, and, go out with a fundraise, or, take on a partner like Unilever, who we could, kind of go under their wing and let them, guide us and provide things like, really great distribution and supply chain and consumer insights and things like that. And so it made sense. And I was ready. I had worked really, really hard for 7 years and thought, hey, this is a chance for me to, explore other parts of myself in my life and still, stay connected to the brand, but, develop as a human too outside the company.
Hmm. Yeah, and as
Yeah.
with a family and everything, I've talked to
Yeah.
so many different people about like how human it is when it comes to timing. When the chapter you're in
Yeah.
at that current stage, if you have a co-founder, what chapter they're in, and there's always like this really interesting back and forth around timing, and it's such um, a very human element to deals like
Yeah.
this. So Unilever, they make their deal. And was there an earnout period? Did you have to stay on for, a certain period of time? And
Mhm.
how long did you stay on?
Yeah, so I had my own contract that I would renegotiate after each year, and that included things like non-compete agreements, earnout potential, and my expectations to what they wanted from me, as a brand, advocate and founder. And it changed each year. I would negotiate a little bit more to what worked for my lifestyle, and it's been, gosh, it was 2017, so it's been almost 6 years now. And I'm still connected to the brand, more on a event type basis. Like if they need me for something to help support promotion, I'm always there. But operationally, I'm not carrying that burden right now.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. And you mentioned, data room and being prepared. What types of tips could you share with an entrepreneur listening right now
yeah,
about how to be prepared for something like this? Because this
yeah.
was a very
That's a
large acquisition and very kind of
mhm.
blockbuster one, I would say, because it was all over the news. I remember seeing it, and these types of things can just really make it seem unattainable to a lot of people out there. And I'm just curious as to what you could share on preparedness.
Yeah, now that's a great question. To be honest, it felt unattainable up until the deal was done. I kept thinking, something could go wrong, and it was just so stressful. And basically, yeah, I think what I learned the most was just to stay as organized as possible with your financials and your paperwork and your partnerships and contracts. Um, don't commit to things that later down the road could be hard to get out of. So, for example, if you do sign a contract or an agreement with a contractor, keep it as short as possible, because the acquirer doesn't always want to jump into a lengthy contract that you've already committed to. Negotiate as much as you can on pricing and things, because it's always hard to bring it down later. One thing that was also a little tricky for us is we had like I said, our own in-house manufacturing, and that's a big liability for an acquirer. So, fortunately, we had a plan in place to outsource the production too, because they just weren't interested in taking on that piece of the business, and so that gets a little tricky too. And I think most importantly, just what your non-negotiables are, and don't be intimidated by the fact that this huge company wants to acquire you, because it's so tempting to just give them everything they need and kind of bend over and say whatever it takes. But know that like you are a partner in this too, and you have a voice, and what your needs are just as important, because you want to be happy with the terms of the deal as well. So
Yeah. And there are quite a lot of e-commerce entrepreneurs that listen to this show, and you guys really did achieve incredible scale. I mean, to put it in humble terms, I mean,
thank you.
tens of thousands of stores, right? I mean, this was how many stores were you guys in at the time of the deal?
Mhm.
And what did that level of scale in terms of volume look like? I mean, you don't have to share specific numbers you don't want to, but I mean,
Mhm.
retail with a lot of people that are in e-commerce kind of seems like this whole different business, because a lot of people are just running their funnels on social media and stuff like
Right.
that, and getting into over like 10 or 15,000 stores is just it just seems like climbing a mountain. So I'm just curious to get your
Yeah.
take on that.
Yeah, at the time of the acquisition, we had about 30,000 doors across 30 countries, which
Wow.
is pretty insane.
Wow.
Um, and that was, to be honest, a lot of it, most of it was incoming, right? Like there were things we weren't actively pursuing at one point because we just couldn't manage it. So it's very possible, right? I mean, if you think about where I started as one person in her kitchen,
Mhm.
and was able to just, take it slowly. I think that's so key because we all think when we start this business, we think it has to grow so fast and there's so much pressure to raise capital or to, you know, outdo the competition. I think it's just staying focused on what you're doing and trying to, put up blockers or blinders, I guess, when you need to. Because if you had told me when I started I'd be in 30,000 doors, I would have certainly laughed. And so, yeah, and if a lot of companies choose to stay D2C or e-com only, I think that's fair and that's a smart play. It worked for Native, right? Like they got the attention of Procter and Gamble just by keeping it simple and clean. We were messier, right? We had all these retailers with all these contracts in all these countries and our in-house manufacturing where they were just we sell online. That's it. So there's risks and benefits I think to each approach.
For sure.
Yeah,
Well, that
yeah,
was a beautiful segue into the finale question. So, knowing what you know now, what would you tell Jamie
yeah.
10 years ago?
Ooh, goodness. Part of me thinks I wouldn't have said a word because I think there was a level of naivety that was so helpful for me. Like once you know too much, you overthink things or you screw up the way things are supposed to naturally play out. So I do think that, not knowing everything was helpful in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
But I think really if I had to give myself a piece of advice, it would just to remind yourself that like you are more than just your business. Because you put so much of yourself in and it's amazing and beautiful and wonderful and stressful and scary. Um, but there's more to you as a human, right? Like, so it's just checking in with yourself and making sure, you're exercising and eating well. And I, right now, I'm in the best physical shape I've been ever because I'm able to, put more time into fitness and taking care of myself. But it's hard as an entrepreneur, right? And it might sound kind of cliche, but just, it's important to just try to make time for it and you'll
Mhm.
thank yourself later. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And a
Yeah.
bunch of people have told me that if your fitness and health is a first priority, usually everything else sort of falls in line
Yeah.
behind it, which I always liked thinking about it like that.
Yeah.
So that kind of gets us to where you're at now. What are you working on now,
Hmm.
and what can we learn about what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I'm always, kind of keeping my eye out for the next big thing and what's trendy, what's interesting, and what's culturally relevant. So I got a little bit into the Web3 space. Of course, crypto specifically has gone up and down and all around, and it's an interesting space to play in. But it's so much Web3 is so much bigger than just crypto. And I've built a brand called BFF, and our mission there was to help educate people on the opportunities within Web3. So within business, within across all industries, and how it impacts us as creators, professionals, and business owners, and just every industry. And so we host educational seminars through Twitter. We've done some Discord chats. We put out content. We have a newsletter. We have a platform on our website which offers education. So I think it's just people want to know. They want to understand the opportunities, and so I saw that potential there, and I've built this amazing community of mostly women who are educating and connecting through that. I'm also still, mentoring other founders. People reach out to me constantly for advice on building their businesses. I'm super passionate about consumer products. I always will be, I think. So, however I can help there is always fun for me. Always keeping an eye out for potential board seats and opportunities like that. So still, very much active entrepreneur, but also a little more time on my hands. I'm an investor. I started a fund with my husband, and it's just the two of us. We have, no other VCs. It's just us as a family office, so it gives us some flexibility.
Nice, very
Yeah,
nice.
yeah,
I find a really awesome trend with entrepreneurs who exit more often than not are
mm,
helping other entrepreneurs. It's such an interesting characteristic that everybody seems to share. Is like there's success, and then they just turn around and start helping
Yeah.
other entrepreneurs do it. And there's something to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like a switch flips because when we were in the entrepreneur seat, we need the help, right? And we're like, if only I had the
Yeah.
answers, and then suddenly like we have them, and it's like, which goes to show that anybody's is capable, and we just sometimes it's talking to the right person or just taking a deep breath or giving yourself some space to figure it out.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
cool. Where can people follow you and learn more about your current projects?
yeah. I'm on all socials, so Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find me on all those. It's Jaime, Jaime Schmidt. I'm also an avid player of pickleball, so I will warn you that you'll see some pickleball content from me. Which is
Very
the
cool.
beauty of getting my business getting acquired. I have a little more time for that. So if
Yeah.
anybody's interested in pickleball, I'm your girl.
Yeah. Pickleball is all the rage. It
Oh
is
man,
everywhere.
yeah. But it's funny because I think of it from a business perspective too, right? Like how there's opportunity for consumer brands to tap in, and how as from an investor's perspective too. So it's certainly a hobby of mine, and it's where I get a lot of my fitness. But it's also like the business piece is very relevant
For sure. For sure.
too. Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. This was a really special episode just because this was very inspiring and just such a awesome scale here. I mean, to get
thank you.
from your kitchen and people working in your in-law unit all the way up to Unilever is incredible. So amazing to have you on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And wherever you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, the links that Jaime mentioned will be in the show notes. And that is it for this episode of The Exit.